So in 2020, entrepreneur and former Zillow executive Austin Allison launched Picasso, a real estate platform that helps people buy second homes affordably and hassle-free using a co-ownership model that aims to serve an unmet need in the consumer market, in the consumer housing market. So today, Picasso customers co-own homes across the US and Europe in 40 markets, from a house in California wine country to a villa in Ibiza, Spain. So 6 months after launching the business, Picasso reached a $1 billion valuation, one of the fastest companies in the US to achieve that coveted unicorn status. But here's the thing. Austin will tell you that Picasso was not an overnight success. Its origins date back to Austin's start selling real estate as an 18-year-old and the lessons he learned in the years spent following his entrepreneurial muse while working 3 jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, which led to his first stint founding a real estate startup in 2008 and then Picasso. I'm so pleased to welcome Austin Allison, who will demystify how he built Picasso from nothing into a 300 employee company, and he'll offer actionable lessons for all entrepreneurs and small businesses. And we'll also share this moment we're in now, how Picasso is capitalizing on the remote work trend for growth. Welcome, Austin. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Barbara. It's my pleasure. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So just to talk about what Picasso is exactly, essentially the business model aims to reduce the costs and the hassle of second home ownership. I would love to know how the brand was conceived and how it fills an unmet need in the housing market.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess to start with an explanation of what it is, Picasso is a service that helps people to co-own homes together. And the way that it came about, this was actually an idea that I started thinking about in some form, really dating back to my childhood. As you mentioned, I grew up in a modest household. My father was a carpenter, and we lived paycheck to paycheck. So I never had a second home. I was like many families, or we were like many families who dreamed about owning a second home. And along the way through my entrepreneurial career, eventually about 8 or 9 years ago, my wife and I were able to buy a second home in Lake Tahoe. And that home became our happy place. And I wanted to find a way to make that dream possible for more people. And one of the things that I learned about second home ownership and second home communities in particular is that second homes are highly underutilized, meaning most second homes sit empty for 80 to 90% of the year. And when a home sits empty, it creates a lot of problems for the housing industry and for the community at large. It strains local businesses because owners aren't there to support the restaurants and markets year round. It actually drives up home prices because as second home buyers are buying up these homes just to sit empty, it takes away inventory from the local workforce and makes it harder for people to afford primary homes. So what we're doing at Picasso is really introducing and enabling a more sustainable and more efficient use of this housing stock, which creates more opportunity for the local workforce to be able to afford primary homes and creates more opportunity for second homeowners to buy and own these homes in a more sustainable and responsible way.
And if you can explain how just the model works, how the consumer goes about participating. I know it's very tech enabled.
Yeah, absolutely. So the entire experience is technology enabled, from the way that we identify the properties to the way that we operate and maintain the properties on behalf of the owners. But the experience is very simple. You simply go to our website at Pacaso.com, that's Pacaso.com, and you find the home of your dreams, and you can buy into that home as little as 1/8 or 12.5%, or as much as 50%, depending on how much of the home you actually plan to use in a given year. And Picasso manages the entire experience. So we're paying the bills on behalf of the owner, we're coordinating repairs and maintenance, we're designing and furnishing the home so that the owners who actually own the property just get to enjoy that home without any of the headaches that are customary of home ownership in general. And the ownership model is actually quite similar to a model that's been around for a long time, which we describe as DIY co-ownership, do-it-yourself co-ownership. Oftentimes, family members or friends or children who inherit homes from their parents will own homes in an LLC. So that's how the ownership is structured. Every home is owned in a property-specific LLC, and the owners of the home just collectively own the LLC, and that's how they actually own the property. So it's a pretty common ownership structure that's been around for a long time. But the service that Picasso is providing is new, and that service is what makes this experience seamless for all of the co-owners.
So there's the differentiation factor. And what's interesting is also that you're doing this now at a moment where we're, the sharing economy with the Ubers of the world. The consumer is now accepting of and has adopted that behavior, right? A little about your background, just to sort of pull the curtain back on all your experience and how that informs, your ability to launch a business successfully. So looking at my cheat sheet, you started selling real estate, as I said, as a teenager. That you had some lean years, following your entrepreneurial muse. You then founded your first startup, a real estate transaction tech business, Dotloop, which streamlined transactions, real estate transactions. Zillow acquired Dotloop in 2013, and you continue to run it at Zillow. So that's a really rich background. I'm curious about what were some of the challenges that you faced during those pre-Picasso years, and what is important to say about how they informed how successfully launching a business.
Yeah, well, the challenges that we faced were really endless. I mean, I'm no exception to the rule of life and the rule of business, which is that there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows, and it's really the journey, the collective journey over a period of years that really makes the experience so rewarding. But for me, I would say a lot of the things that I experienced early on in my life really translate well into what I experience and have learned in business, which is number one, there's a lot of challenges along the way. Like when you're introducing a new business, you're really sort of creating something from scratch in many ways. And anytime you're creating something from scratch, there's some resistance that you'll face along the way, just getting people to understand your idea, getting people to change their habits. All of these things are just difficult. So what I've found is that following your passion and really believing in the mission deep down in your heart is probably the most important thing that you can do to overcome those challenges. Because when you're pursuing something that you really believe in and solving a problem that you've experienced firsthand, it gives you this level of like intensity and belief and faith about the idea that is sort of a superpower in a way. Like regardless of what you face in the way of challenge or resistance, if you believe in what you're doing, you're just going to keep pursuing it, day after day after day. So I've experienced that in many aspects of my life, and I certainly experience it in business every single day. The second thing that I would say that I've learned that's true of life and business is that you really need to surround yourself with great people. I've found that we're kind of an average of the people that we surround ourselves with. So, if you want to build a technology company, it's helpful to be surrounded by people who have experience building technology companies. Or if you want to be in the real estate business, it's helpful to surround yourself with people who have experience in the real estate business. And over the course of my career, from Dotloop to Zillow to now Pacaso, I've been really fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of great people. And I think that had a lot to do with why we were able to sort of hit the ground running with this business, is we had a lot of the right people in the right seats right out of the gate. And to your point earlier around the overnight success, I don't really believe in overnight successes. In my experience, they generally don't exist. Oftentimes what appears to be an overnight success was a lot of work, and effort leading up to that perceived overnight success. So in my case, like the people who started Pacaso with me are people that I've been building relationships with and or working with for more than 10 years in most cases. So like the 10 to 15 years that we worked together leading up to this moment really enabled us to be more equipped with this business than we were 15 years ago when we were working on my first company together. So I would say that those are the two biggest lessons: follow your passion and surround yourself with great people.
To those points, there's also the notion of institutional knowledge, which is important, right? And what's interesting is if you could talk about what you specifically learned, and we talked about this, from your role as both an entrepreneur and then an executive at Zillow, that was key to launching Picasso, and that all entrepreneurs can glean from and benefit from.
Yeah, well, I would say that, I mean, one thing that you mentioned around the institutional knowledge is definitely something that I think all entrepreneurs can benefit from. Like the more time you spend in an industry or in a type of business, you acquire a lot of knowledge and experience that is pretty invaluable. Like I've spent I started selling real estate when I was 18. I'm 37 now, so almost 20 years. I've been in the real estate business, and it's been 15 years since I started my first company. So I've learned a lot about the real estate industry. I know what motivates real estate agents, how they think, what their pain points are, how the brokerage industry works, how MLSs work and trade associations. And, I could rattle off all these things about the real estate industry that are sort of tribal knowledge about our industry that someone from outside the industry wouldn't know until they spent years and years in the industry learning all of those things. So I think there's definitely value in compounding knowledge over time. I forget which book it was, but I read a book at one point that was talking about mastery and how it takes like 10,000 hours on a task before you become kind of a master of that task. And there's lots of other examples of this from, I remember people talking about Tiger Woods would hit something like 1,000 golf balls per day, or Michael Jordan would shoot, X number of shots per day. Like all of those activities contribute to this level of experience and knowledge. And I think that's really, really valuable for any entrepreneur, is to compound that knowledge over time. And I would say, beyond the other two things that I already mentioned about following your passion and surrounding yourself with great people, if I had to add just one more, it would be the importance of just grit and perseverance. Like what I've found is that I mentioned the roller coaster analogy, where there's highs and there's lows. And oftentimes we just read about the highs. Like, you talked about our unicorn status in 6 months. I mean, that was cool. That was a nice little milestone that we experienced. But like, there's a lot more things that we've experienced that were struggles, or low points than high points. And what I found is that those struggles are where the magic happens. Those struggles are what build character. And those struggles are the moments where companies and people become the best versions of themselves. So I think it's really important to embrace the struggle and really live in the moment, as opposed to waiting for some, high point at a future date.
That's really incredible that you said that. One of our earlier speakers said that he heard Tyler Perry, the super successful entrepreneur, said, "The struggles are your blessings," which is to your point. I wanted to just talk about, demystifying, pulling the curtain back on scaling the business. I mean, you reached that 1 billion unicorn status in 6 months. I think that it's, if you can pull the curtain back on what the keys were. I think you and I talked about 3 factors that were really instrumental to scaling the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we already talked about, is surrounding the company with great people. I mean, if there's a shortcut in business, that's the one. So that was really important. And the people who started Picasso with me are people who I've been building relationship with and or working with for 10 plus years in many cases. So that's very helpful. A second thing that I learned on my first company was the importance of market sizing. My first company, Dotloop, it was a great, or is a great software that's adopted by a lot of real estate agents. I mean, we had something like 1 million real estate agent subscribers on the tool. So a lot of people use the software, but it didn't become that big of a business in terms of, the value and the revenue. And it's largely because of the market size. There's just not a lot of dollars that are spent on an annual basis on productivity software in the real estate space. So with Picasso, one of the things that's really cool about our opportunity is that it's a massive, massive opportunity. I mean, there's about 100 million second homes around the world, and most second homes sit empty for most of the year. And there's, many tens of millions of people who aspire to own second homes, but are unable to afford or justify owning the whole thing. So like we have an opportunity to impact millions of people and really make communities better and introduce a more sustainable solution to the housing industry. And that's largely a function of the size of the opportunity, which is, I think, pretty important to note. And then I would say that the final piece is around really starting small before you go big. And another way to describe that is like becoming operationally excellent on a small scale. Like before you can scale up, it's important that the model is kind of working. It's important that you have product market fit, meaning you have a product that people are interested in, that they're willing to buy, and you have a model that delivers value for the customer before you start to scale it up. And we were able to do those things, pretty quickly in the early days of Picasso. And I think that had a lot to do with our really strong start.
Just to sum up your second point for our viewers, what you're talking about is the total addressable market. And what you learned from Dotloop
Correct.
was that, and the takeaway for viewers would be find a market where there is enough opportunity, right? Essentially.
I don't think that should be the number one thing that an entrepreneur considers. I think entrepreneurs should really focus on problems that they believe in, regardless of how big the market opportunity is. But if the question is framed around scale, how do you get to scale really quickly? I think total addressable market matters, right? Because it takes a smaller percent of a big market to create a large business. Whereas if the market size is smaller, it creates a larger percent of the market to create, a large business, which is harder to do.
It's an important distinction. I'm moving ahead fast because time is running out, and we have so much to talk about still. But I'm curious about, when you launched your business, you conceived it before COVID, but you launched it during COVID in October 2020, and obviously the world changed. And with the growth with hybrid work, really redefining a market. How have you leaned into hybrid work and work from home how have you capitalized on that to grow the business?
Well, we've not just leaned into hybrid work or really fully distributed work, but we jumped in, head first. Our company is fully distributed. We've got around 300 people on the team, and we basically have no offices except for one small office to collect mail. But we don't have like a headquarters office. Everybody works remote. Our team is spread across 35 states and 7 countries, and I think it's great. I mean, it certainly requires organizations to build new muscles that come more naturally in an office environment. So there is some additional work and effort necessary to be an effective distributed company. But what I've found is that the advantages of being a distributed company are profound. I mean, the biggest advantages that we've experienced are, number one, we can recruit and attract people from anywhere in the world. And that's a huge advantage, right? Because it's just numbers. You're casting a broader net when you can recruit people from anywhere. I think the second thing that's really powerful is it empowers a more free and autonomous way of life for the employee or team member. And I think that's pretty important because quality of life matters. And if you can spend more time with your family or choose where you want to live, that's a pretty rewarding, luxury and benefit that a company can offer to an employee. But
Right.
I will say that had we started in an office and switched to hybrid or fully distributed, I think it would have been a harder transition. And I really admire the companies who are going through that now because I think it's harder. For us, we were able to start in a distributed way, which made a lot of these things easier because we really didn't develop any of the kind of office culture habits. We just started distributed right out of the gate, and it's been a huge blessing.
Thank you so much. I could go on with you, but it's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Austin. This has been terrific. I'm so appreciative.
Thanks, Barbara. It's been my pleasure.